If it is a smooth road, frankly, it's not worth traveling. That is a typical comment from Max Tuchman, co-founder and CEO of the app Caribu. After struggling with English as her second language, Max realized education was the greatest equalizer. She joined Teach for America, Mayor Bloomberg's office, the Gates Foundation's Harvard Business School, and was selected as the White House Fellow, one of them, a White House Fellow by President Obama. And Max is now channeling her passion for educational equity into consumer educational technology with Caribu. Caribu is the leading educational family entertainment platform for children ages 1 to 13, maybe even 0 to 13, to have a virtual play date with family and with friends. It is worth reflecting on the state of the venture capital industry to note that Max is the 59th Latina to raise more than $1 million in venture funding and the first Latinx CEO to raise plus over $1 million in RegCF equity. Ladies and gentlemen, with us today, Aqui Ahora, podcast created by PAG.law, specialists in venture capital operating across the hemisphere. We leave with you Max Tuchman, co-founder and CEO of the app Caribu, and Juan Pablo Cappello, managing partner and founder of our sponsors, PAG.law.
Max, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, as I was looking, I felt like I knew you, but every time I look at your bio, I'm really, it seems to me it represents it's everything right about this country and everything that's wrong about this country, and everything that's right about venture and everything that's wrong about venture. So, here you are, families immigrated from Latin America, from Cuba, Harvard Business School, Gates Foundation, Teach for America, all this amazing stuff. And you launched this great business. But then it's definitely worth reflecting upon that you're only, the 59th Latina to raise more than $1 million in venture capital funding, and the first Latinx CEO to raise $1 million via, the crowd RegCF, the crowdfunding regs. And, for me, I was there in the late 90s, early 2000s with Patagon. We raised, tens of millions of dollars, close to 100 million, sell the company for 700 million. And to think, 20 years later, you're only the 59th Latina. Let's round it up to 60. Let's round it up to 100. It's shocking. It's embarrassing. And yeah, how do you feel about that? Because as I say, you really represent the promise of this country, but then, you're also a reflection of just how limited these opportunities are for some people.
Yeah. And I have white privilege, which, so I even have that advantage of walking into a room and people not even knowing that I'm Latina until I out myself, or unless my hoops are bigger than they expect. And
and you have a Harvard degree, and
my name doesn't sound, Hispanic, and so I get to pass in those terms, but I think, and it's tough when you're a Latina. It's intersectional, right? Mm-hmm. I never really understand, is someone underestimating me because I'm a woman? Are they underestimating me because of my immigrant story? Are they underestimating, right? Like, you kind of have to go in a bunch of different directions to be like, where is that bias coming from? And how do I anticipate it? How do I proactively kind of get in front of it. And seriously, I remember when I was first pitching, the pitch deck is supposed to be your problem statement, your solution, your attraction, blah, 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 blah. And then at the end, you're like, and this is the team to do it. And I realized after a couple of pitches, and my advice to founders always is pitch as much as you freaking can, because each time you pitch, you learn something new. It's just more practice. It allows you to understand what questions are coming up, what things to anticipate. But anyway, so I've been pitching. And I realized that a lot of investors are spending 90% of the pitch wondering if I'm qualified to run a company. And then all of a sudden at the end of the deck, I have a picture of me next to a Harvard Business School logo. And I was like, damn, I spent all this time with them sitting there being like, I don't know, she's a little teacher. Can she run her own company? Does she understand numbers? And I was like, screw it. So I moved the team slide to like slide 3. And I was like, hi, I have a business strategy. I'm competent. I know what the F I'm doing. Let's move forward. Let me tell you about this business, how we're going to make a shit ton of money together. And like, let's stop underestimating me.
That's amazing. And I mean, did you notice there was a before and after?
Yeah.
In terms of how you pitched? I mean,
it was one of those things where it's like, you don't want to admit that that's an issue, but then you talk. I mean, I remember I was one time at an investor event. Again, we're going to keep names out of this, but I was at an investor event, and a guy who I know, who's, Silicon Valley investor, but now lives in Miami. So, I mean, that's still a pretty big group, is like, yeah, I wouldn't invest in moms. And I'm like, I'm sorry. Like, first of all, the fact that you said it to me means you don't know me at all. But second of all, like, what, like, let's unpack that. Tell me more, right? And I'm like, tell me more about that. And he's like, well, I mean, they can't be 100% dedicated to their company. And I was like, oh my God. So like, I'm like, there's too many things to even discuss there. But can you, imagine a mom who walks in and her first slide is like I have such a support network that like I do, and also like, who cares, right? Like, I mean, 100% like it's such a weird thing, but just knowing the biases that people are walking in with, and then being able to anticipate that. And that's how you do it in the business too. You have to know when you're a diverse founder, what those biases are about you as a person. And it's the same thing you're doing with your traction. It's the same thing you're doing with your market. It's the same thing you're doing on the business side, where you're saying, these are the things that I think people are going to not believe that there's a big enough market. They're not going to believe that there's, this kind of traction, whatever. And so you front load that. And I saw a difference, and I do it with everything, right? Again, with the business, I was like, oh, wow. I got to a point at the end of the deck where people were like, oh, if you had just told me that in the beginning, oh, okay. Right. So there were a lot of things where, and that's why I say pitch your heart out. Like, and I think a lot of founders are so protective. They're like, no, I don't want to tell anyone my idea. I don't want to share this information. It's like, you're not going to get the feedback that you need. You're not going to be able to iterate your deck. I literally don't think I've ever presented the same deck twice. I mean, I
got to say, again, having, been in this game for such a long time, it's so, you're on the one hand, it's so inspirational to me that people like you exist, right? On the other hand, it is so disheartening because, look, when I went to college, I went to college in North Carolina, and I didn't really understand racism really profoundly because, I'd grown up in Chile and I came to the US for my last few years of high school, and it was a very diverse high school. It was probably 40% minority, but it was also just very diverse socioeconomically. And when I got to Duke, it was like a bird sanctuary for white people. And, I still remember like my best friend there, when his dad came to visit, from Columbus, Ohio. Dad was a lawyer. And, he pulled me aside after like the second time he met me. And he said, you should change your name, because it's like, you don't want to go through life as Juan Pablo, and I can take care of that for you. Like, it's almost like, I don't know, it's like a circumcision. Like, you don't want to go around with that. Like, you need to be more like a white person. And his point was what you said, like, you have white privilege. Why are you handicapping yourself through life? And I just, again, when I look back and I say, okay, that was 35 years ago, and I'm not hung up on that, but it's just one of those things.
But it obviously stuck with you, right? I mean, every time someone says something like that, it sticks with us.
Yeah, of course. But it's like, okay, I take note. Now I know what that means, right? And that's when I decided I was taking as many classes as I could at Chapel Hill, because it was a much cooler, diverse school. And there's a reason why I didn't go back to Duke for 20 plus years after I graduated. But again, it's really leaving aside even what's been going on the last couple of weeks here in the US. Just again, when I saw that you were the 59th Latina founder, who's and even if that number's wrong by a factor of 10, which it's probably, if it's off, it's by a factor, it's by 2 or something. It's just such a shocking. And so the other thing I've noticed, it's not only you have sort of pitched more than anyone I know. You also did this approach where you would do a startup competition. If there was a startup competition like a lemonade stand, in Coral Gables on a Saturday, right? I mean, let's talk about that, because it's funny. One of my daughters is a budding entrepreneur, as you know, and I say, honey, you got to get out there. Like, don't wait for the big prize. Just win whatever you can win as fast as you can. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So, again, when you come from a minority background, and especially socioeconomically, right? When you don't have the same network, when you don't have the same savings account or funding, you have to bootstrap when you have your own idea. And trust me, like, my parents are small business owners. Like, what I learned about business is you have costs and you have money coming in, and the money coming in should always be more than the costs. But in the startup world, I walked in and I was like, wait, that's backwards. Like, you should always be raising a ton of money. It doesn't matter what your costs are. Like, just keep going, just keep taking other people's money. And I was like, what is this? So in the beginning, when Alvaro and I were co-founding Caribu, and I was eating chicken nuggets because we were bootstrapped, and I was like literally using all my savings to get us off the ground. You have to look at what you have at your disposal, right? And you have to be creative. And this is literally, I think, why we even started raising money 12 months later, because people were just shocked that I was still, hawking Caribu, and that the product hadn't changed, and that I was still around, and that I hadn't taken some 6-figure job. And I think that really, that grit and determination really impressed people. And I had now traction. So my strategy was, I was like, okay, I have a consumer product. I have something really freaking amazing. Probably anyone in the audience is going to connect to it, whether they have kids. Someone who has kids, that this is a pain point for them. And so every time I got up on stage, a bunch of things happened. One, we had social, right? So anytime we were a finalist, a semifinalist, anytime we won something, they would, the organization would share it on social. We would share it on social. Then once I got up on stage, I was meeting judges. I now have a list of like 7,000 people that get a quarterly update from me about my business, because these are judges that I pitched to 3 years ago at Collision. These are people who I have made sure that I've followed on LinkedIn or followed on Twitter, and I've built, and that's why we were so successful with equity crowdfunding. I walked in the door. I mean, equity crowdfunding platforms fought over us because they were like, wait a second, you're about to bring 5,000 new people to my platform plus, right? You're starting out with these people. So what I was doing is I was building my network. I was building a market. I was building traction. And at some time, and again, we won 30 times, or the finalist 30 times, right? So we ended up picking up cash, legal hours, some marketing stuff. I ended up with a golf session. I don't know what we did with that. We kept trying to give it away too, and like no one wanted it. And
you don't have enough white friends if you can't give away a golf session.
I was like, can you trade this in for mini golf? Like, I really do not want to deal with this like golf thing. It definitely is not. It's not where I'm doing business. And I think that first year I was like, here we are building, I'm a Latina in Miami, right? So if
Right.
you do the math, less than 2% of funding, VC funding, goes to companies in Miami, and less than 1% goes to diverse founders, especially women, and being a Latinx, right? So it's like negative 0.00084% chance that I had of raising money. So I was like, I have to be creative. I mean, when you're, first of all, when you're Latinx, second of all, when you're Cuban and you can keep a 1957 Chevy on the road, you're damn creative and you are relentless and you are like, you'll figure it out. And so I was like, I think I have proven to investors there is nothing that can take me down or Caribu down, right? Like we will win.
And that's such an, I mean, I love the chutzpah of that. But it's such an interesting, but it really is, or we say in Spanish, la cintura, right? That que demostraste que tienes cintura. But I mean, what's so interesting with that strategy is, so many founders, I think, are somewhat lazy and they're just swinging for the fences, right? And, as an angel investor, I actually stopped angel investing and began doing more company building about 4 or 5 years ago, because I had this experience a couple times, which was I found founders, a project that I thought was great. I gave, me and some other angel investors gave the founders, $200 to $1 million, which, for me, being somebody who grew up in Chile with not a lot of money, was an unfathomable amount of money. And then 6 to 9 months later, when they hadn't gotten Sequoia to, put in $20 million, they were like, we're done. There was like
were those all male founders?
They were male founders.
Oh, just checking. I just wanted to name it.
You're totally right. And but it really made me feel, and that's why I'm, I want to get to know you better and, bring, obviously, I need a better network. I need a, bigger pool that I'm drawing from. But yeah, I really began to feel that, the venture game, the same way funds were sort of looking at it, that it's winner take all. And, there's only 2 or 3 investments out of my whole portfolio of 50 to 100 that ultimately are going to make a difference. That a lot of founders began sort of looking at the game like that. And, some of these, some companies, it is true, hey, it's better to fail fast than it is to, draw it out. But a lot of companies, I'm like, you didn't even give it a chance. And going to what you said, if they had been hustling, going to pitch conversations, I believe they could have iterated their product with that $250 to $1 million and figured something out. And let's talk about that. In terms of your product development, how did it evolve? How did this constant pitching, how did the, pitching at pitch competitions, how did that, factor in terms of, your product roadmap and really trying to find that product market fit?
A ton. So in the beginning, so in that first year, so that was 2017. Again, I literally, if I found a pitch competition on Eventbrite, I didn't care where it was, I would apply and I would show up. And so it was, incredible. It was like, I remember there was like a pitch competition I did in New York City, and it was like everyone's introducing themselves, and it's like, I'm Linda from Brooklyn, I'm Matt from Manhattan, I'm Jamaica from Staten Island, and then I was like, I'm Max from Miami. Like, what the hell are you doing here? But I was like, I'm here to win, and I'm here to expand my network, and I'm here to make connections in New York, and I'm in publishing, and so. Right. I think I think, and especially, and this is very stereotypical, but women see networking as very icky, because it feels like it's transactional, like you're going in because you want something, or someone's gonna ask you for something. But I believe networking is community building, because at some point, I'm going to offer something to someone's going to, I can map out every dollar I have raised at Caribu to who introduced me. And who introduced me, who did I bump into literally our lead investor came from, this is a crazy story, but I convinced someone to give me a free VIP ticket to Supex Subex, whatever.
Yeah.
It's called. Someone like gave me a free VIP pass. I ended up at the VIP networking like event. Someone that I was talking to was like, "You went to Harvard?" They introduced me to someone else that went to Harvard, right? And then like all of a sudden, like, you know, that person then introduced me to another investor who put me on a panel. And then because I was in that panel, I met this guy who became my lead investor, right? I mean, that's why you're building your network. That's why you're putting yourself out there. That's why you're having the coffee dates that you're like, I'm not really 100% sure where this is going to go. It's not going to possibly go somewhere. Every investor that you meet is, and I always say it's not a no, unless it's like a really weird, like no. It's not really a no. It's a not right now and not in this exact iteration. It might be, I mean, I pitched at an NFL Super Bowl event because of a woman investor that I was connected to who I was too early for in the seed, but she connected me to them.
Right.
Like, it's just, and I think that's what the pitch competitions really bring. And it also, like I said, I don't think I've ever pitched the same deck twice, because in each, and this is really important too, this is where founders get really lazy as well. It's a lot easier, trust me, to not spend every night revising your deck and putting in, again,
Right.
anticipating questions and reordering things and telling a little bit of a different story. But it's kind of like when you apply to schools. I mean, law school is a little bit different, but I remember with applying to business school, it was like dating a bunch of different people at the same time. Like each one I had to be like, you're my favorite. Like, I love you. Like, oh, all these things are amazing. And like, we're going to be soulmates forever. Like, it's exactly what you're doing with investors, and it's exactly what you're doing in each pitch. And so the iteration of the product, back to your question, we iterated so much because of that feedback. Not only did we get feedback from the audience, we got feedback from the judges and their questions. We got feedback from what we won and what we didn't win. For example, we won the 1776 global pitch competition, right? Kicked 72 cities' butts across the globe. Miami took it home.
Wow.
And I remember very specifically, we got an investment from Rise of the Rest because of that. So $100,000 from Steve Case's Revolution, Rise of the Rest. And I remember Anna, who's the partner there, Anna Mason, she asked me a question. She said, what are your margins? Like, I'm on stage, right? Like, I just finished my 3-minute pitch. Like, she's like, what are your margins? And I was like, they're great. And she was like, but what are they? And later, you know, we were talking backstage after I got the investment, because of course, when I won the big check, she was like, the award goes to Max. My margins are great, Tuchman. And I was like, I was like, saucy. I like it.
Yeah, she didn't say that with love. I can tell.
And she's amazing. And but later we were talking, and she was explaining to me why I won, right? She was saying, you know, wow, you know, we went backstage, we looked at your app, we played with it, and this is what was really interesting to us, and the fact that your margins were like, again, you're getting that feedback that you never get when you go into a boardroom and you pitch Sequoia, right? They come back and they go, no. But everyone else, I think, and a lot of, sometimes the feedback was wrong. And sometimes the feedback hurt, and I was like, "You're absolutely right. I need to shift this or change this or differentiate the way I talk about it." But so to actually answer the question again.
This is interesting. I mean, feel free. Don't answer the question for another 20 minutes. This is great.
So the product market fit thing is actually really interesting. A couple of things happened to get us to where we are today, and I do believe we now have initial product market fit. So I kept learning that 90% of startups fail between seed and Series A because they don't find product market fit. And it's not that they don't find product market fit, it's that they run out of money trying to find product market fit, right? So here we are, we raised 1.3, first part of our seed round, and I realized we better find product market fit. And two things happened. One, and I want to give him credit. So Jason Calacanis has a scale conference that he does every year. And look, he says this is selfish. I invite founders to things, and I do workshops, and I do conferences, and I give founders free tickets because you are my pipeline. I make money when I invest in you and I hit a home run. And so why wouldn't I build my own pipeline? And I'm like, damn. Right. But his content is amazing. So I remember I went to his conference, and you know, Superhuman, the email client.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So it wasn't Raul, but it was one of the people on his team. She did a presentation on how they found product market fit. And so it's the whole, kind of Sean Ellis growth hacking 4 questions. How do you, you ask your power users, how many of you would be disappointed if Caribu went away? And then, you kind of iterate from there. So that was the number one thing that I was like, there's something here. We should try this. But of course, you go home from these conferences and you're like, I don't have time to execute on anything I just learned.
Right.
The second thing that happened is there was an investor that I met at a conference again, who I had a call with. He was invested in a competitor at the time, they're actually not really a competitor, but when you do children's books, everyone's a fucking competitor. Sorry. And so but he was like, hey, have you read Raul's article on finding product market fit in first round capital? This is an amazing article. And I was like, oh, so now here I had, this kind of live experience. Now I had the article to look at. And then I met with Andy Johns from Unusual Ventures. He's kind of a big deal in product and growth hacking. And I met him because Maria Derchi from Refresh invited me to a dinner with him. And I just happened to be in San Francisco. So we grabbed coffee. So again, right, I can literally and I can tell you, I know Maria because I went to middle school with her sister, and we started a nonprofit kids middle school group on animal rights. It was CARE, Kids for Animal Rights Everywhere.
Wow.
It was. So anyways, so I'm sitting down with Andy Johns and I'm telling him I got to get on the Today Show. I gotta be the first thing that people learn about. And he goes, no, you have to be the first one to product market fit. And those 3 things, I was just like, you know what? I got to do this. And so I literally took that first round.
One sec. Did you feel there what you were getting was almost like the professor telling you, here's what you need to, here's what you need to build. These are the answers. This is because it sounds like, what happened to us at Patagon was, people ask us sometimes, how are we successful selling the company? And, my point was always, we spend a lot of time talking with potential acquirers about investing, but what we were really trying to understand was, what did they want to buy? So it wasn't necessarily that we ultimately built the company we wanted to build. It wasn't we were mercenary, but we were constantly focused on, we want to build the company that is the most interesting to be sold. And we felt like, it's like talking to a professor, hey, look at the draft of my term paper. What feedback do you have before you grade it? Why wouldn't you take that offer? And I feel in venture, again, founders are often lazy, but if they actually would talk to potential investors, not so much about invest in my company, though that's always nice, but much more about, hey, so I often say to founders when they're doing their A round and the valuation's frothy, I'm like, okay, but do you know, okay, you're being valued at 10 million now, but figure your next round, the market's going to expect you to be valued at 30 million. Do you know what kind of KPIs or metrics you need in your business to be valued at 30 million? And most of them have no idea. It's almost like, well, I'll figure it out once I get this money. And I'm like, well, you might start building a bridge in the wrong direction.
No, that's so true. And I think I think you just it's kind of like managing people, right? You can go to business school and you can take a class, and I literally did, called Managing Human Capital. And then all of a sudden you actually have to manage people and you're like, what the hell was I doing in that class? Why do you even have a class on something you cannot teach?
Right.
You do have to live through it. And I feel like getting your first institutional, getting your venture, first of all, it's a treadmill, right? It's once you're on it, you're on it. And I don't think, that's a problem with founders, right? Is we are so in the weeds. We're so day to day. Sadly, a lot of times we don't have time. If we're building a good business, like you said, that's what gets acquired. You don't get acquired just because you want to get acquired. You get acquired because you ran an amazing company. You built an amazing business and people want it. And I feel like we get so in the weeds of the day to day and the things that are happening right now in the short term that we don't have the time to step back and look at the long term. I was working on this actually at the Treasury Department. that we were trying to push companies, public companies, to think more long term, to not think of just the short term and the quarterly calls, and and to think about creating long-term value. And it's something we don't afford our founders enough time to do, is to pause and say, and again, it's like not like anyone's like keeping me in a cage and I'm like, I can't do this myself. But I think, and I will say the way that we did it is so there's only 3 of us on our Caribu board. I am very protective of my board. And so it's me, my co-founder, and again, this lead investor. And what I love about him is that he was a managing director at like an M&A shop, right? And so all he thinks about is backwards planning. All he thinks about is the exit and helping guide us, so that Alvaro and I can focus on the day-to-day, so that we're, there's kind of eyes on both pieces. Because I think founders, a lot of times, we don't, and a lot of times it's not even having the space. You might have the space and the time to stop and reflect, but if you've never been through it, if you've never actually sold a company, if you've never been acquired before, you don't know what it looks like or feels like. And so it's very hard. It's just like you're making stuff up.
Well, I'll let you know something. When you guys get acquired by a big number, whoever acquires you is going to destroy the company. I hate to tell you. That's just...
I mean, that's why we're not, we've actually had, no, I'm not even joking. We've had like 2 or 3 acquisition offers already. I mean, especially, yeah. I mean, people are like, so one of them is, we don't want you in our way. We don't want, like, they're like, with off the market, which is very clear. The other one is like, holy crap, like this would be an amazing kind of complement to what we're doing. And then a third one is a longer story. But I think what I have realized is like, yeah, I could probably make a ton of money if I sold the company, but they're never going to implement the vision that I have.
Exactly.
And no one's going to make it as big as I know that this thing is going to be. And so it's a compliment. I love that people are trying to acquire us left and right, because it means we're doing something right. But I ain't letting this go. This is going to be big. We're already big, but.
No, that's amazing. And so if I understood correctly, you did that initial raise, and then then you did the RegCF raise, or was that part of?
Yeah. So usually at Caribu, we don't do anything traditionally. And so usually what you do is you do an equity crowdfunding or a product crowdfunding, which we had a great conversation about. You do that first, which is kind of testing the market, creating the market, proving that there's a market.
Right.
And then you do kind of more institutional after that. I will say that having done institutional and corporate and family office first allowed us to do the RegCF in a way where people were like, oh, well, are you going to ever be able to get institutional, right? There's such a bias against equity crowdfunding. It's almost like it's the same caca face that people make when you like have when you went to medical school outside of the US, like, oh, what, you couldn't get into a medical school in the US. Like there's just it's a bad bias. And so we were able to kind of navigate that, I think was really good. The other thing is, again, last year, the only reason we went to equity crowdfunding, so again, we had raised 1.3. So let me explain like kind of the logistics of it. What happened is we raised 1.3 in June of 2018. And the rule of thumb is when you raise $1 million, it should last 12 to 18 months. And if it lasts 18 months, then month 12, you need to raise again because you have 6 months of runway. Well, I screwed myself because I now had to raise in June 2019. And if I'm not, a white boy with a hoodie and a cryptocurrency company, I'm not raising over the summer. So June 2019, I'm like, holy moly, like I did not plan this correctly. And I said, you know what, we'll just do like a small bridge over the summer for equity crowdfunding. We'll raise $500,000. Like that was my goal. You should look at like the articles that were written about us really early on about equity crowdfunding. I was like, we're only raising like $500,000. And then all of a sudden, I mean, it just in 3 months, we had raised $1.7 million. And we were like, well, there's no point in kind of now going to institutional. The whole idea was raise a small little bridge over the summer and then go to institutional in the fall for, it's like a seed plus. There's no real reason to name these things, but to raise more money in the fall. And when we raised 1.7, I was like, screw it. we're closing a $3 million seed round. We're done. Like, let's take this money, let's put it to work, let's build this business, let's grow this thing, and we'll raise a Series A in the future.
Yeah, no, it was so for somebody, looking at it from afar, under the crowdfunding rules, as you know, there's sort of $1 million, slightly over $1 million max. So when I began sort of hearing like, oh, they're well above $1 million, I'm like, what? Like I understood the engineering of doing that, but it's so rare that anyone ever has to face that issue because, the sort of statutory limit.
Yeah, less than 2% of companies raise $1 million. And yes, technically the under RegCF it's 1.07, and then we opened a concurrent Reg B to take all the accredited investors and move them over.
Investors
and that's how
out, yeah.
Yeah.
No, that was absolutely amazing. And I heard you talking about that one time, that what's really cool is since you got so many small investors who were really committed to the product, they became, they're some of your most, biggest advocates, biggest, sort of super users, bringing other people to the platform because they feel literally and figuratively invested in the platform.
Yeah, well, the way I talk about it is, I love everyone that's on my cap table. I don't say I'm lucky. I don't say I'm lucky because luck, it's kind of like, oh, like you didn't do anything. No. We were very intentional. We worked really hard to bring the right people, and we turned people down. We have turned down money because they just weren't aligned. And so we have like some of the most amazing investors on our cap table who we're very fortunate. But again, you're always trying to keep your cap table small. So if you're keeping your cap table small, then you only have a couple of people who are financially invested in your success. And those people, again, because they're accredited, have, a couple of other investments. And when they go to dinner parties, they may or may not talk about you. They might have just invested in something cooler. You may not be the, startup du jour. But when you have regulation crowdfunding and you have now 1,000 people who this is their one investment, this is the most exciting thing they've done that summer. They are also a user, right? We had so many people invest in Caribu because they had the pain point. They couldn't see their grandkids. They wanted a better. And so now you have these users, you have these evangelists, and also we have people who have now made introductions to publishers, people who've made introductions to their companies. Like, I mean, these are people who are opening doors for us and left and right. And it's just, so it was, to us, it was like a home run. I mean, it was cash, it was evangelists, it was, just like, again, kind of a marketing buzz. It was, we got tons of press. We had celebrities invest in Caribu because it was RegCF. 2 NFL players and the first female NFL coach invested in Caribu because it was open like that, right? It's just, and then again, I think this is the way I say it. I raised $1.7 million over the summer without being sexually harassed, right? That's another effing better. So,
and so the last 3 months for you guys, there's that expression that, there are decades where nothing happens and there are weeks where decades happen in terms of change, adoption, etc. I mean, one reason I was very excited to, chat with you, and, I've spoken with Andres Moreno from Open English, Felipe from Nearpod, a number of, Mural, Mariano Suarez Batan from this platform Mural, which is a collaborative tool to allow teams to share. And as I thought about those platforms, I was very interested to hear how, your tool, which allows, people to, read and spend time with their children or grandchildren or just people they care about remotely, how the last few months have, what it's meant for your business.
Well, as you can imagine, we 10x'd. Oh, wait, can you still hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Sorry, something happened on my computer. So as you can imagine, we 10x'd overnight. I mean,
Amazing.
if there was a picture And again, I just out of my same mouth said, I don't like to say that I'm lucky, but the definition of luck is preparation meets opportunity. And there was no better prepared company, team-wise, runway-wise, funding-wise, product-wise, to take advantage of something where we could really help families during this pandemic. And I say that the number one priority for families during the pandemic was to stay safe, still is. And the second priority is to stay sane. And
right.
Caribu was able to kind of step in and give parents a break while they were working from home, give them sanity that they were putting their kids on screens, but it was educational screen time, right? So the guilt of parents feeling like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. I've got to put my child on a screen. At least you were putting them on Caribu, which was educational and, kind of follows all the guidelines of the American Association of Pediatrics. Like we were very thoughtful about how we rolled it out. And again, it was like, it was product market fit in like its even better essence. And
right.
the core use case of Glama, right? The glamorous grandma or fabuela in español. Abuela fabulosa, seguro. The fact that she now had a 15.8% percent mortality rate when she walked out the door and she was stuck at home, but she still wanted to read and draw and do an activity and do a virtual play date with her grandchild. Caribu was the only one there ready to go.
Right.
And what we found is Caribu was like a first class flight. When you have a magical Caribu call, you can't go back to FaceTime, right? Like it is exactly like a first class flight. You may have to fly coach at some point in your life again, but you will remember the little warm nuts and the towels and the extra space that you have. You will never forget that experience. And that's exactly what grew us even further between March and April. Again, growing 10x overnight, that's great. But the engagement and the usage and the retention and just the things that people, we were getting content coming at us. We had publishers reaching out to us saying, your numbers are growing. We want to get in front of your global user base. We were growing across the globe. We used to be in 160 countries. So we used to have users literally in 160 countries, over 200 countries. We did a heat map of where calls are taking place. It was 6 p.m. Eastern when we looked at the world map. It's on Firebase, so it's real-time calls happening in the world. The calls were happening 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, 11 p.m. London, 4 a.m. Israel, or whatever. Yeah, 6 a.m. India. It was insane. It was just literally across the globe, people were making these magical Caribu calls because, again, that experience was a first-class flight experience. And so what's been really encouraging is we're not like a lot of the other products where people tried it and were like, oh, okay, this isn't going to be a part of my life. If you just look at our social, if you look at our Instagram, people are constantly posting about Caribu saying, this is a game changer. I'm a lifer, what is it? Caribu or bust.
Well, look, that's amazing. Thanks so much for taking the time to chat. It was interesting before I met you, somebody, because, I have 3 daughters, and somebody said, oh my God, I got to introduce you to this woman. I'm sure she's what you'd want your daughters to be when they grow up. And after I met you, I was like, no fucking way. She's who I want to be when I grow up. So let me say kudos. Thank you. You're amazing.
Well, we couldn't have done it in Miami without OGs like you. So a very big thank you to you too, and all you've done to support our ecosystem, right? Because the rising tide floats all boats, and we as founders can't do it without people in the ecosystem who are building the ecosystem and who are supporting us and helping us. So thank you again for everything you've done and continue to do.
Well, thanks so much.
Este fue otro programa de Aquí y Ahora, auspiciado por PAG.law, especialista en Venture Capital. Hasta pronto.